everyone. I hope you enjoyed the great food at the soy luncheon. Our good friends at STEM Connector have a short video and a presentation about the great programming that they're doing. And so if we'd welcome them to the stage now and give them your attention. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. I am Sherry Brown, Vice President of Science Strategy at Monsanto, but outgoing chair of the STEM Food and Ag Council. We wanted to thank Ambassador Quinn and Catherine for the opportunity to again come to you and tell you a little bit about what we're doing on the council. Our council was birthed 3 years ago here on this stage at the World Food Prize, and we've come together to bring industry, corporations, the public sector, societies, youth-serving organizations, and higher education, all interested in the mission of bringing together the understanding of the need for innovation in food and agriculture and the next generation of students who will be the innovators who help us feed 10 billion in an environmentally sustainable way. And by bringing all the parts of our ecosystem together, we believe we can help move the needle and inspire the next generation. Last year, I was on this stage to tell you about our second-year project, which was Feed, Nourish, Thrive, a portal that would help us tell the students, the next generation, about the exciting careers in food and ag in a way that they could digest it. So we created 50 videos of young professionals talking about their journey into the exciting jobs and careers in food and ag. And in the last year, we've had thousands of students and their parents and their teachers come to our portal and learn about the exciting careers. I'd like to introduce Chantal Simpson, who is our graduate fellow, who's working on continuing to grow Feed, Nourish, Thrive, and make it an even more exciting portal. Chantal?
Good afternoon. Over the past year, the Feed, Nourish, Thrive website has reached thousands of visitors and is currently engaged in a site redesign to enhance user experience, search engine visibility, and to integrate pre-existing high-quality STEM food and agricultural resources. With our website, we have highlighted numerous pathways into agriculture, including the careers of women, veterans, and other underrepresented minorities within the field of agriculture.
Thank you, Chantal. My name is Crispin Taylor. I am the CEO of the American Society of Plant Biologists, one of the members of the STEM Connector Food and Ag Council, and with Kevin O'Sullivan from PepsiCo, we'll be taking over from Sherry as co-chairs of the council beginning tomorrow. What I'm here to do as the incoming co-chair is introduce our project for this coming year, and we have a little brief video to do that for you. Just here it goes.
By 2050 of 9.5 billion people. That's 2.5 billion more people on our planet than we have today. With the same amount of water, same amount of land, we will not be able to feed this population without new technologies, new inventions, new innovation that are going to come forward because people with STEM backgrounds work on those problems.
By 2050, the world will add an equivalent of an additional China and India. And in shrinking natural resources, that's a call to action.
And it's really clear that we're going to need, a workforce that is more skilled and more capable.
In the U.S. for agriculture, there are about 60,000 jobs every year, and remarkably, that number, about half go unfilled because we don't have the either technical skills to fill them or, more importantly, the awareness of the opportunities that exist in agriculture. A a job that did not even exist 5 years ago called data scientist, in a few short years will have a gap, a need of about 1 million data scientists across the world.
A great software engineer or a computer scientist coming in from Silicon Valley, and he says, you know, you've got lots of opportunities. You can go work on the next camera app for the iPhone, or you can come up with the, you know, like the 6th version of Angry Birds, or you can come work for us and figure out how you're going to feed the world and save the environment.
So I just wanted to highlight a couple of additional points. So this town hall will be running on April 27th in the DC area. We're running it in conjunction with the Global STEM Talent Summit Initiative, which will also be in DC on the next day, April 28th, and is also organized by STEM Connector. As implied in the video, this is both a physical event with students from around the DC area and further afield participating in person, but we also will be running this as a live web event, and would invite you, those of you that are working with youth particularly, to help us grow the global audience for this event as a live online event. We're also, while we have some pretty good ideas for who we would like to deliver the information and speak at this event, we're very open to your ideas and suggestions as to other compelling speakers we might include. And we'd welcome your participation online or in person in DC on April 27th. And once again, the email address is townhall@stemconnected.org for any information and to let us know your ideas. And I want to thank again the World Food Prize, Chairman Quinn, Ambassador Quinn, and all those involved here for the opportunity to once again share with you what STEM Connector Food and Ag Council has been doing. Thank you very much.
Grey matter infrastructure for Africa. I like it. I'm going to go away. If I forget everything else, I will never forget that sentence. That's exactly the way we ought to think about it. Welcome to the next panel. I'm sure that we can all agree of the importance of human and institutional capacity building, of which, of course, grey matter infrastructure will be a part for African development and for food security. Could I ask the panel members to please join me up here? President Banda, Professor Abegaz, Professor Kropff, and Professor Ejeta. Please join me on the podium. The moderator has asked me to introduce all of the panel members at this point, and then I will turn over the floor to the moderator. Her Excellency, Dr. Joyce Banda, the past president of Malawi, is an entrepreneur, she's an activist, she's a politician, she's a philosophist. She was president of Malawi from 2012 to 2014. She founded the Joyce Banda Foundation International, which seeks to transform villages through its 5 pillars, namely women's income, education, maternal health, including HIV and AIDS, leadership, and rights. Currently, the Joyce Banda Foundation International has benefited more than 1.3 million people in Malawi. President Banda has also been very active on the international scene. She was instrumental in the formation of such organizations as the African Federation of Women's Entrepreneurs, which is currently running in 41 African countries, the Council for the Economic Empowerment of Women in Africa, and American and African Business Women's Alliance, of which she served as the first president. On a personal note, I have been observing, I went to Malawi many years ago, and I've been visiting from time to time, and I'm observing the progress that has happened in Malawi in agriculture, and I congratulate President Banda on the tremendous progress made during her tenure. Professor Abegaz, Berhanu Abegaz, is the Executive Director of the African Academy of Sciences, a position he's held since 2011. Previously, he was Professor of Chemistry at the University of Botswana for 17 years and at Addis Ababa University for 21 years. Professor Abegaz has contributed to the rapid growth and development of the Academy that we have witnessed during the last few years. During this time, the Academy has secured recognition by the African Union and by NEPAD. The number of fellows, and in particular women fellows, has increased significantly. Professor Abegaz has assisted in articulating the three important functions of the Academy, namely recognizing excellence, providing think tank functions, and engaging in programmatic activities. One of the achievements of the Academy under his leadership has been the development of partnerships with global funders and the establishment of the Alliance for Accelerating Excellence in Science in Africa. Professor Kropff, Martin Kropff, joined CIMMYT as the Director General in 2015. He came from Wageningen University and Research Center, where he was President and Vice Chairman of the Executive Board for almost 10 years. He earned his undergraduate degree in biology at Utrecht University in the Netherlands and a PhD in agricultural and environmental sciences at Wageningen. Bear with me for 1 second while I get my instructions here. Okay. From 1990 to 1995, Professor Kropff was the systems agronomist at IRI, where he led an international program with national agricultural research systems and universities in 9 Asian countries on systems research and simulation for rice production. After 1995, he served successive roles at Wageningen University, UR, including as Director General of the Plant Sciences Group and on the Executive Board. From 2013 to 2015, he was a member of the Board of Directors of the CGIAR. I have been invited to also introduce Brady Deaton. Brady, are you on the, you are here, welcome. Brady Deaton is a member of BIFAD. He's a Chancellor Emeritus at the University of Missouri, and he has been appointed by President Obama to BIFAD. And that is all the information I have on you, Brady. But next time I introduce you, I'll make sure to do a better job. It is now my privilege to introduce the moderator of this panel, Gebisa Ejeta. Gebisa is a good friend of mine. He's the 2009 World Food Prize laureate. He's a distinguished professor of agronomy at Purdue University. He received the 2009 World Food Prize for his sorghum hybrids that are resistant to drought and the devastating weed striga. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with what striga can do to a crop, Google it. It is a tremendously important contribution that Gebisa has made in this area. His work dramatically increased the production and availability of the food supply for hundreds of millions of people in sub-Saharan Africa. Combined with his persistent efforts to foster economic development and the empowerment of subsistence farmers through the creation of agricultural enterprises in rural Africa, Gebisa has had profound impacts on lives and livelihoods on a broader scale across the African continent. Gebisa, I'm now going to turn the floor over to you, and I look forward to an exciting panel discussion.
Thank you very much, Per. For the title of our panel this afternoon is Human Capacity and Institutional Building. Just the speaker that we listened to at the keynote speaker at noon, if anyone is to ponder on what it means to building human capacity in the continent of Africa, what you get when you combine God-given native intelligence, a good education, and opportunities, that's the kind of thing educational and opportunities provide. And so we've got plenty of opportunities to create those kinds of individuals in the continent of Africa. I wanted to Is there any way I need to point to? Oh, all right. I wanted to provide some background on this topic. I think in 1949, President Truman, when he declared the .4 program, and there were 4 different points during his inaugural speech that he included. Point 4 was, we must embark on a bold new program for making the benefits of our scientific advances and industrial progress available for the improvement and growth of underdeveloped areas. The Point 4 program was really the beginning of the Global Development Assistance Program. It was a program that had in its basic tenet the ideal of helping poor nations help themselves. That was really the beginning of technical assistance programs, because before 1950, any technical assistance program that went on in the continent of Africa was really colonial arrangement. And so since then, for nearly 35 years, we had development assistance programs. The Point 4 program went on from 1949 to 1961 until President Kennedy created and enacted the Foreign Assistance Act, and also opened the U.S. Agency for International Development. And so those 35 years of the work of the Point 4 and USAID program was really the ones that built the foundation for human capacity and institutional building in not only in Africa, in many of the developing countries, giving them the foundation upon which to build their nations. 25 years, we have had some decline since the mid-1980s until 7 years ago, when we really had the beginning of the Feed the Future program that really resuscitated the development assistance programs, energized a lot of what we hear today about agriculture and food systems that have really had a lot more boost and energy in what we do today. The legacy programs that built human capacity and institutional strengthening programs in developing countries are, of course, the U.S. Agency for International Development and Point 4 program before that, had trained hundreds of thousands of students from all over the world, and the Canadian International Development Program, CID, and IDRC, also a Canadian program that really was a very creative capacity building program in the continent of Africa. Rockefeller Foundation, a legacy program again. Many of you mentioned the Rocky Docks, and the Ford Foundation. It was a these were prestigious fellowships in many developing countries that really generated the first round of leadership in developing countries in the 60s and 70s. And these programs trained a lot more people. The World Bank also is a legacy program because through arrangements with government, the World Bank also educated and built institutions in many developing countries. The British Overseas Official Development Assistance Program, also a legacy program. And Scandinavians, Norway and Sweden in particular, have trained a lot more people. And today, I would say programs in Germany and Netherlands are really training. They're providing a lot more fellowships for developing country students to come and study in Germany and Netherlands than we do here today in this country. And so these programs over time have provided poor developing countries the necessary foundation for building their institutions. Even at the weakest, USAID continues to provide the leadership. Even today, there are a number of programs. These are just examples of human and institutional capacity development programs that the U.S. Agency for International Development runs. Out of that, IAGRI, the more innovative agricultural research initiative that provides institutional building support for Sokoine University in Tanzania, is a good example of institutional building in higher education. I just want to make a point on why we have really organized a panel on this. Is really nothing is more foundational for development and development assistance programs than having native capacity at the human level as well as at the institutional levels to really take more experiential learning forward, and that way also to benefit from development assistance greatly. Otherwise, it becomes an activity of external programs coming in and out, but the traction that we generate cannot be as impactful as it would be if the internal capacity could take advantage of it and really benefit from that. And so the new development landscape in Africa is encouraging, that we have exceptional expansion in infrastructure development, primarily through the assistance of the Chinese and the World Bank and now the African Development Bank. I think the World Bank and African Development Bank are joining, but the incredible infrastructure expansion in the continent of Africa in the last 10 years has given a lot of us help. And there is also improving macroeconomic policies that encourages foreign development initiative, direct investment, foreign direct investment in the continent. And at the same time, Africa is also beginning to invest directly internally into institutional building exercise. And so there is a resurgence of external agriculture development assistance programs. These are really the primary institutional development institutions that are necessary for development, although as agriculture expands, the variety of value chain programs and institutions in which human capacity and institutional strengthening is necessary. One of those that I really would like to take as an example, and it was mentioned this morning, is in as much as plant breeding and economic development activities are going on, Africa is still struggling to establish a functional seed system, for example. So many of these have opportunities for intervention. I think the challenge for Africa is to recognize the indispensability of tertiary education and making serious investment in building the institutional infrastructure. So I think one last point I would like to make is Africa needs to benefit from lessons from China, India, and Brazil. Each one of them done it differently, but each one of them, the common denominator is they all invested systematically in human and institutional capacity building in their countries to really drive the development process that has taken place to bring about transformative change there. Again, this is indeed my last point, that with growing complexities of policy making in a more globalized world, I think well-educated, well-informed generation of African leaders to lead and inform its people and to design and implement their programs is really necessary. When you have good leaders that are well prepared for the position and really have the mindset to work with other nations and other programs, it's a lot much easier, I would say, to deal with a leader like Akina Adesina than it is with leaders like Robert Mugabe, if I may say that. So with that, I would move on and give the panelists to the opportunity. I thought maybe I would start with you, Brady. You and I had worked on commissioned study for U.S. Agency for International Development on human institutional capacity development. And if you may say a few sentences about that and really indicate the kind of advocacy that you have for youth programs and human capacity, and maybe get us started that way.
Gebisa, thank you, and let me say how honored I am to be with Your Excellency, President Banda, and other members of the panel, and to be with my colleague in BIFAD, Gebisa Ejeta, who brings his own gravitas to these important discussions, particularly with regard to Africa. I have to begin, Gebisa, by picking up your point on youth because of what we have seen today. And I commend Ambassador Quinn for the fabulous attention he's given to bringing 400 plus high school students and others from around the world here who participate in essay contests. I recall as a youngster writing those conservation essays each year as part of my development. And it reminded me, standing out there, the many times I stood on the stage as chancellor at the University of Missouri and greeted and congratulated each graduate as they left the university. I was standing up there watching the 400 plus students come in, and I realized we're looking at our future. We're looking at the leaders, the artists, the innovators who will lead us into the future. And so I congratulate this convocation, the World Food Prize, and what it means to us with regard to the specific questions of human and institutional capacity development. Because if you think of the youth of Africa, one of the most rapidly growing parts of the world today, in every village across Africa, there is a future artist, there's a future scientist, there's a future leader, there's a future entrepreneur who will shape the future that we are walking into as we speak. And there could not have been any more inspiring discussion of that context and the inspiration for youth and the two lectures we heard just prior to coming in here. President Kim from the World Bank, President Adesani from the African Development Bank. Each spoke to that urgency that Martin Luther King brought to the issue of civil rights. Each spoke to the promise of youth and the scourge of the earth that Roger Thoreau has talked about of child stunting, getting rid of it because we have so much more to look forward to, and we can do better. And we can do it with a sense of urgency. And I'll come back to that with regard to the land grant issues and the university issues in just a moment. The study then that enables us to address this issue in a context of looking to the future was actually suggested by the first time when I became chair of BIFAD, and Gebisa and I and others, there's 7 of us, sat down with Rod Shaw, then administrator, and he said, will you please look at USAID's programs in human and institutional capacity development, analyze and make recommendations to us about what you see that can be the most promising for the development challenges we face in the world. And that's a study we undertook at that time, and Gebisa was chair of the board committee that led that study. And Vic Lichtenberg, I give him great credit, at Purdue University, came in and worked with us with a small group to examine the issue of institutional capacity development in countries of the world and the role the United States has played in that. And we came away with a strong affirmation of the work that had occurred under Title 12, which began in 1975 as part of the Foreign Assistance Act of 1961 that President Kennedy had signed into law. We found, when we examined the historical record, that the program of institutional linkages between universities in this country and universities abroad had led to a profound change in the capacity of science and technology and education worldwide, particularly in Asia and Africa. And we focused attention on recommendations that would expand that strength and enable us to bring the latest, working with our colleagues in Africa, particularly for the focus of this discussion, to ensure that we're addressing the cutting edge issues that make a difference, that we are looking at the latest revisions in curriculum that can provide the most advanced education for Africans that we could possibly develop jointly. And as part of the mission we've had in our own country of research, extension, and outreach, and curriculum development, it's that outreach and extension that led to massive civic education and 4-H programs. I was explaining to a private sector, a private university leader in the last week about how we used our university system to inspire a whole generation of new leaders and scientists in the United States. And we did that in many ways through 4-H. There are many programs represented here in the Borlaug Foundation and the Borlaug Leap Fellows, and the African young leaders that have been brought to this country are all examples of this. But I said, think of what a difference it makes if you spend your formative years making that pledge, your head to clearer thinking, your hands to greater service to your community, your heart to greater loyalty, and your health to better living for your club, your community, your country, and indeed the world. That's the 4-H pledge. So it's that inspiration that can be brought, that wholeness of building a human being that is desperately needed in so many parts of the world and is clearly one of the great challenges that our speakers today talked about for Africa. So those linkages with universities can be powerful tools for moving us ahead in the world.
Thank you very much. Martin, if I may come to you, and if you may take a few minutes and share with us the kind of human and institutional capacity building that the CGIAR traditionally have conducted and the kind of activities that you do now.
Yeah, microphone is working. Now, first of all, starting with this morning we've seen the main challenge, I think, and the vision, that's where it starts when you talk about capacity building, is basically what Akin also indicated. Africa must be able to feed itself, in spite of quadruple population size in the future. So that means also a real strong research infrastructure, not just academic research, but research, academic research and research of delivery as well. So basically a science for impact, as I call it all the time. And I think in CIMMYT, but also in all the other CG centers, Norman Borlaug started when he was in Mexico, directly also training people. He started with breeders, with the Pakistani breeder, and we all know what happened afterwards. But later on, it was also capacity building in a broader sense, because we need a framework. Many people think about just training or a PhD or whatever, but I think we have individual capacity building. That's training, short training courses, that's academic training courses. It's institutional capacity building of organizations, for example, the national agricultural research systems in Africa that are developing themselves very well, and the CGIAR is supporting them very well, but also broader in society. Because if you have an institution and you have individuals and it's not embedded in society, for example, linked with extension, nothing is going to happen as well. Now, what is also very important is that we don't train people just in a discipline. Sometimes you have a breeder who's just breeding, but you also have to be connected to society, because what I think is important is that everybody realizes that each innovation has a technological component and a socio-economic component. And you need an integrated approach to really have impact in the end. So this is also very important in terms of the capacity building, what we do at the CGIAR. And examples are, for example, the courses that we have, but also the infrastructure. In Africa, the CG centers, I think 12 or 13 of our CG centers are active in Africa. In most African countries, we have large offices and large institutions with infrastructure. We share that infrastructure with the national systems. For example, the big screening facility for Maize lethal necrosis, the large facilities for double haploid breeding, for example. These are infrastructures also for capacity building, and national systems benefit from this. Now, one of the main things that we discussed this morning, that we heard in this presentations also of Jim Kim, scaling up. Impact at scale. We heard people also talking about zero hunger. The only way you can do that is, I think, also through the private sector. These days, we team up with the private sector. For example, our breeders generate, together with the other researchers, the new seeds, but who is getting them to the farmers? And that's so essential. And we see that we are building up right now in Africa a complete seed industry from scratch, sometimes very small businesses that grow very fast. So we also train people in entrepreneurship. How do you set up a seed business? Next to the seed business, because with seeds only, you get nowhere as well. So we need small-scale mechanization to get people out of hand labor. We see too many people, especially you women, sometimes with babies on the back, working in the soil, which is bad labor. With small machinery, two-wheel tractors, for example, the whole system can change in a village. But then you need also a service provider, so somebody has to become an entrepreneur, and we train them. And you need also people that can maintain the equipment. At the same time, you develop basically jobs in a completely different way. Jobs that are decent jobs, jobs of the future, interesting for young people. And we heard this morning also from Jim Kim how important it is that when we are changing agriculture, we change jobs as well. What I always say, agriculture in Africa, but also in other countries, I'm from the Netherlands, is the kickstart of the economy. In times of financial crisis, the agricultural sector, the agri-food sector, I must say, is the sector that keeps on going. So it's capacity building in several ways, but it has to be in connection. It's not just individual trainings. They are important, but it's also institutional. And the CGIAR, all the centers together, CIMMYT, but also all the other ones, are really focused on helping the national system, because it has to be demand-driven. This morning also we heard supply-driven technologies are not working. You need to have it making demand-driven. And that's why it's so encouraging to have so much good leadership in Africa. Many ministers of agriculture that we are working with that are really focusing also on making sure that the CG centers support the national systems.
Thank you very much. Professor Abegaz, your leadership at the African Academy of Sciences had focused in an array of programs, if you may share those with us.
Right, thank you. Let me begin by thanking Ambassador Quinn for inviting me to be part of this highly distinguished panel. I would like to, I recognize that we have here perhaps foundations, funders, etc., and I was told there is a need to express an African voice and from the continent. In that regard, there was no louder African voice than the speaker during the lunchtime, and I can hardly match that. But he's a banker, and I'm from the African Academy of Sciences. We work with the African Union as a strategic partner, and so it's perhaps important to project a continental perspective on the issues that have been raised. Research and development and innovation are important, but what are the facts in the ground? The average number of R&D personnel, scientists, engineers, etc., per million population for the African continent is only about 85. United States, I believe, is over 3,000. Korea is 4,000 plus. So you can see really the paucity of R&D personnel in this. Perhaps to respond to this and perhaps to also meet the demand for higher education, there has been a huge expansion in higher education, unprecedented in any other continent in the world. Perhaps the leader in having thought of this in the beginning was the country, the federal government of Nigeria, when in the 1970s they increased the number of universities from about 6 or 7 to something like 30. Now, Ethiopia, the second most populous country in the continent, had only 7 in 2007, but over a short period has increased to about 64 accredited non-government and government universities or colleges awarding degrees. In Kenya, there are about 70 now, and private and public institutions, and there is interest to increase this by 20 in order to have a higher education, learning, and research center in every county. So this huge expansion, you may think, in spite of all this, Africa enrollment in higher education is still one of the lowest in the world. But this sudden expansion has resulted in an inevitable dilution of quality. And you will see institutions who are no longer able to focus on research. PhD level staff members are really in very low numbers. You will see then a growing youth population, 60% now is under 25, rather not being very inspired by this decline in quality, and therefore they would like perhaps to go elsewhere to get good education. The number of really well-educated people living the continent is about 20,000 a year now. So these are the situations. So what is being done about it? So there is, if I go back to Nigeria, which started a long time ago, there was a recent study which put spots on the countries if an institution has published at least 30 papers a year. There were 10 in South Africa, 10 in Egypt, but 20 in Nigeria. Because of that early start in expanding, it took time, but quality is beginning to come. Then the other efforts that are being made are 15 universities from almost among the top 15 universities, 15 universities appear in the top 1,000 in the world. And these 15 universities have started an alliance for research universities in Africa, and they are taking responsibility to really develop the cadre of highly qualified personnel in research and development. Likewise, the World Bank has African Centers of Excellence universities with 19 countries participating in Western Africa and 22 in Eastern Africa. This is really a World Bank giving perhaps loans, and the countries also investing money. So the need for focusing on quality is becoming important. At the African Union level, there is a Pan-African University in 5 regions of the world, entirely devoted to postgraduate education, and they are struggling, but I think the ideas are lofty, and at the Academy we're trying to help them to what is needed to hire quality staff from anywhere in the world. So I think just for the last part for this question, I'd like to say that Africa is the only continent over this century that will quadruple the population. All other regions are not going to increase. So there is really a need for investing the future workforce, not just of Africa, but of the whole world in doing this. Thank you.
Thank you. President Banda, thank you for your patience sitting through all these academics talking. And I understand your passion is working with farmers, and you had indicated to me the strongest educational support that is needed is to educate the farmers and build a farming institution. If you would share that with us.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Moderator. Allow me to thank Ambassador Queen for the invitation. and particularly the honor to be sitting here with these distinguished scientists. I asked myself, how come I'm invited to be there? So I felt that I was invited not only as somebody who has been a leader, but also as somebody who has spent most of my adult life fighting for the empowerment of women and youth. As I was introduced, they said that the Joyce Banda Foundation, which is about 20 years old, has spent those years providing income into households through agribusiness, believing that when there's income into the household, the girl child in that household shall go to school, because when the resources are low, the girls are not going. The second pillar is girls' education, because if they don't go to school, they get married early and they die giving birth. That's why the third pillar is maternal health and HIV and AIDS. The fourth pillar is, having been a leader myself, I know that when women get into leadership, they focus more on issues that affect the household, women and children. And finally, the issue of human rights is a cross-cutting pillar into those four pillars. I'd like to say how proud I am to see so many young people. Last year, I had an opportunity to speak at their event, and I'm told that we are going to meet again tomorrow, because I believe that our young people here are not the futures of tomorrow, but the futures of today. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, as the other panelists have said, 54 countries of Africa, most of the countries are very small, like Malawi, Rwanda. In those countries, for example, Malawi, until independence in 1964, we were only 4 million people. As I speak, we are 15 million. And we have been told that in 2050, we shall be 50 million on the same land to produce enough food. Therefore, this panel is timely to build individual capacity as well as institutional capacity to make sure that on the same land, we produce more and we produce enough for our families. Secondly, there's desperate need for technology, innovation, and research to produce food in agriculture on the continent of Africa. For your information, the research is showing that the average age of the African farmer is 60. And yet, 65% of Africans are young people. I truly feel that it's a lost opportunity if we don't pay a lot of attention in engaging the young people right now. Right now, starting from their school curricula to make sure that agriculture is on the agenda in their mind, as the president of the African Development Bank said. Most of the time, in a rural setup, agriculture is looked upon as an occupation for those that don't go to school. But if we start early with our school children, with our youth, encouraging them to get involved in agriculture, to look upon agriculture as business, then we will benefit as a continent. But for that to happen, we need to build the capacity to make sure that they are interested, we are attracting them. I don't know if you know this, but in Malawi, I think it's only 27% of young people that have access to any computer. By the time they see a computer, they're adults maybe in high school, if at all. Here, I see 2-year-olds playing on a computer. So that is, for me, very, very sad, because it means we are leaving a whole generation behind. Because they will need to be the technology for them to engage in agriculture, to find markets, to send messages. But if they have no access to even phones, even computers, then it is going to be a disaster. Third, I would like to highlight the challenge of the lack of extension services. You find that in most areas in Africa, and in Malawi in particular, I know for sure that most people have no access to extension services, and therefore they don't know how to grow the crops. They don't know how to use the modern technology. They don't have modern seeds, improved seeds, and inputs. Research that is being conducted, very good research, commendable work by our scientists, is not getting down to the people. And then sometimes when they design these modern technologies, they don't consult the end users. So you find that, for example, in one country, they designed the energy-saving cookers. The women rejected them because they didn't like using them. I truly believe that sometimes, even if people are not educated, they know what they want and they know what they need. And it would help very much to save resources if our scientists took the trouble to consult the end users. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, one other worry for me is climate change. You find that in a country like Malawi, where water was the greatest resource that we had, I am being informed by experts here in the US that we have lost about 60% of our water resource in 2 years, which means when I was in office, I introduced what I called a two crop a year initiative. Now, if we don't have enough water, there's no way we are going to irrigate or have a second crop. Finally, I wanted to point out, before I hope you'll give me another chance to talk about what I think are the solutions, but post-harvest wastage is what also worries me. In Malawi alone, it's 40%. And I don't know how much more food is being wasted in the rest of Africa. After harvest, after working so hard, after harvesting, they don't know how to ensure that that food is protected. And I was talking to a potato scientist at lunch, a specialist in sweet potato production. Up until now at 66, I didn't know that you can keep potatoes for a year. I'm told here in America it is possible. These are simple things that we ought to know, because we grow a lot of potatoes and then they go to waste. Mr. Moderator, let me first stop there.
Thank you very much. Maybe taking a lead from you, I think we're running out of time soon, so maybe recognizing that there is an array of human and institutional capacity building that is necessary in a continent like Africa, you know, both from production to harvest and post-harvest and through all the value chain, the institutions and the capacity that we need to build is much. But if you would each take your own advocacy for the kind of human capacity and institutional capacity that is necessary, and now that we have all stated the issues and the problems, if you may identify one or two solutions that you see, small hanging fruits that you can leave as a message with the audience. Martin, let me start from you, and then we move this way.
Yeah, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, but I think the key is that we have a coherent approach of all the capacity building efforts that we have. For example, with CIMMYT, 40% of our work is in Africa. So what we are now developing is, we call it the CIMMYT Academy, which is basically because we have all these trainings activities. Each project has a training component, a capacity building component. We want to make it a coherent set of activities. And also we want to train many more PhDs, because my colleague on the right side also indicates universities are being built in Africa. We need to train more professors in Africa, also to train the young people as well. And as CGIAR centers, we can help there, of course, together with universities in Europe, in the US, but especially also together with African universities. So training at all levels and make it a coherent set, individual, institutional, and countrywide.
Thank you very much. Professor Abegaz, 1 minute.
Okay, 1 minute. Yes, I had so let me focus on one. I think there is a need to shift the center of gravity for a leadership in African research and associated capacity building to African governments and scientists. I think this is a very important point. And you know, a lot of times African governments have been blamed again and again for not supporting R&D. But if you look at the change over 20, 25 years, the profile of African leaders is changing. There are more scientists and really eloquent speakers who are devoted, who believe in science. I think this is important. Even there are 24 African billionaires. Some of them are even coming to help, and I can mention a few of them. So I think it's a good time. We should not lose momentum. The final thing is that any collaboration between African institutions and institutions outside the continent, I really would like to put in a strong request that this be looked at, or the success measured, how over time African leadership, instead of African following, and African leadership emerges over time. That must be a good way to judge. And if to promote intra-African collaboration, while at the same time give quality input from Northern institutions. Thank you.
President Banda, I can't have you leave without you giving us some word about the future of African leadership.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. I believe that the future lies in the hands of the Africans themselves, and I'm talking about political will. If across Africa, the governments take responsibility to ensure that research is continuing, but the findings are getting to the people are getting extension services, the African Union taking the lead to unite Africa and initiatives across Africa and ensuring that African countries are sharing good practices and learning from one another will be very critical going forward. Finally, I wanted to say that there are so many countries doing well, and I want to congratulate those that are doing well. But I believe that true agricultural production goes side by side with good governance. So fighting corruption, making sure that our resources are safe for the benefit of agriculture and food security on the continent of Africa. Finally, I want to say that as we go forward and we achieve food security at household level, we must also realize that African families, Africa needs to educate its own household in behavior change, because men are eating first, best, and most, and women are growing the food, storing the food, processing the food, cooking the food, and eating last and less. Thank you.
Dr. Deaton, any final word for us?
USAID and working with APLU have conducted studies that demonstrate that the highest rate of return on education, higher education in the world, is in sub-Saharan Africa. So it's a matter of how we do it. It's essential for the processes that are underway there. Tertiary education, extension, as President Banda has implied at least. I think it's so vital that it's going to be done one way or the other. Africans are taking it in their own hand to do this, but it needs support. And we have recommended to our USAID that we engage in much more linkages with the institutions of Africa, and it has to inspire the youth for the future leadership that we have in place.
Thank you very much. And I would end with the way I started. I think the needs for development assistance are great, and there are a variety of needs, but there really isn't any more foundational investment that can be made other than, starting with human capacity building and strengthening the institutions in Africa so that development assistance can really pay the dividends that it's due. And ladies and gentlemen, with that, I thank the panel for the great job all of you have done, and thank you for your patience and understanding.